People of Reddit born before the 11th of September, 2001, what was experiencing 9/11 like? The glory and optimism of the 1990s ended in September 2001 and gave way to a fear-based society that has lingered ever since. The entire world f***ing changed in a day and never changed back. Definitely this. Maybe it was a coming of age thing since I was barely 13. But it seemed like my carefree childhood ended suddenly and I was thrust into a world of needing to understand politics and terrorism, and I think that's what jettisoned the age of hyper-partisan politics we've been dealing with ever since. Crazy. We stopped schoolwork to watch the news live. At the time I was confused about what was going on. But after I got home my family explained it to me. I was in band class when it happened. Then English class when we heard about the Pentagon. The girl in that class I had a crush on ran from the room crying because her dad was on a business trip to the Pentagon that day. That moment was when it went from this is f***ed up to truly feeling how horrible it all was. I watched a couple thousand people die on live uncensored national television when I was 10. Everyone was scared and didn't know what to do. The news coming in was absolute chaos. Realizing along with all the adults in the room that we were watching people jump to their deaths is something I will never forget. I was on an airplane that left LGA at like 7:30 am. Didn't know what happened until landing in London 7 hours later. But the plane got spooky quiet halfway through and all in-flight service ended. Lots of whispering. I was scheduled for flight on Delta. San Francisco to Florida. The 11th of September. Early afternoon. The plane I was to board never arrived. It was scattered over a field in PA. That was going to be my first time on a plane. I would not board a plane for another 15 years. Surreal. I watched it live on TV and it didn't even seem real at first. I thought it was just special effects. I remember watching footage of the first plane hitting the first tower just shortly after it happened. It was on a small TV mounted to one corner of the wall ceiling of the classroom and I thought the plane was small, so like a private jet rather than a big commercial airliner. I figured it was an accident and was dumbfounded how the pilot could hit such a large object. Then the second plane hit the second tower. But it still took a second for me to realize it was an intentional act. I couldn't imagine how anyone could do something so heinous. I was 9. I went home from school every day for lunch. And my parents told me when I got home. They just said that something bad happened in New York and explained that somebody had flown a plane into a building and hurt a lot of people. I went back to school that afternoon. And it was being talked about in class. My most vivid memory of that day was of a girl who bullied me. She was Iranian. And she was very upset. She said she knew that Iraq would be blamed for this. And her grandparents lived on the Iran-Iraq border. And she was terrified of what would happen to them. Edit to add. The fact that someone is old enough to be on Reddit asking this makes me feel old. I was in high school. Sitting in my chemistry class early in the morning. Another teacher came in and whispered something to my teacher and she turned on the TV. Saying something like some idiot flew a plane into one of the twin towers. Double quote. We were watching for a few minutes and then another plane hit the other tower. Demeanor changed in the room from curious to bewildered. I was 21. Watched it live on TV. My best friend's father was on the 101st floor of the North Tower. I remember seeing the smoke clouds from my hometown. 22 miles west of Lower Manhattan. I remember my mother screaming when the first tower fell. And then the second. 13 people from my town were killed. I knew 12 of them. Every moment of that day is etched into my memory and always will be. I was 23 working in a call center in the UK. At first we thought it was an accident, but after the second plane hit we knew it was deliberate. Then once we heard the Pentagon was hit, to a colleague of mine said, "Fuck this. I'm going home. What if we're next?" Double quote. A call center in the UK. My mom picked me up from school after the second tower was hit. She then took me to see the black cloud that engulfed the Manhattan skyline. Finally dad come home covered in soot. I imagine you and your mom standing there. And your dad walks up behind you too covered in soot. standing there for a few seconds like Indiana Jones in The Last Crusade when they think he went over the cliff but he's standing behind Salah and Sean Connery. I was in a job interview when the first plane hit. We left the interviewer's office and one of the other employees immediately told the interviewer a plane hit the World Trade Center. I went straight home and turned on the TV just before the second plane hit. It was surreal. I called my mom who was working in her garden. I told her to turn on the TV. Didn't matter what channel. That this is world changing. She asked if she could do anything about it. I said no. She said so why bother and kept gardening. I spent the rest of the day glued to the TV. I think my mom had a better day than I did. I was working in an office building not that far from the Pentagon at the time. We felt the impact of the plane when it crashed. And the wave went through the building. Everyone ran to the windows. Even though that was pretty much the perfectly wrong thing to do. The building management then evacuated us into the street and we had to figure out how to get home. The train system wasn't running, so one of my co-workers gave me a ride since they lived out the same direction I did. Took 5 hours to get what usually would have been like a 30-minute drive. We all wondered what was going to happen next. We're on edge for weeks expecting more attacks or other things to happen. And wondering how the world was going to change as a result. I was waiting for Dragon Ball Z and that shit came on TV and it annoyed me. I was a small kid, I had no idea what historical impact it had. In this episode of Dragon Ball Z, Vegeta crashes into the North Tower. Asterisk. I was 16 and in shop class. We weren't listening to the radio at that point since class had just started, but our teacher came out and unplugged it. Told us to all go to our booths and to work on a complex wiring problem. Since we were 20 minutes from Boston, everything got locked down. It wasn't until that happened that he told us. We didn't have TV in the shop, so we all listened on the radio. All day. Finally got home and saw the footage and it was surreal. It doesn't make sense to anyone who wasn't socially aware before 9/11, but everything changed. The world is entirely different. I thought it was Pearl Harbor and the start of WW3. Pearl Harbor film came out in May that year. I'm sure that helped. I was scared. The country was a lot like it is now, with a lot of criticism of the government. Right after the attack, everyone all of a sudden was a patriot. And ignored all of the problems they were having. That was lame. That BS gave birth to America. I was at the beach with my girlfriend, now wife. My mom called me and told me to turn the TV on. I turned it on and saw what was happening. I immediately called my friend because he had family in Nick and he lived in LA. We just watched the whole thing on TV all day. The following week we just couldn't really do anything because we had gone back home and our city is a big banking center, so it was locked down. It was all just surreal. I was 20 and my girlfriend, now wife, was 18. The whole world was ahead of us and we were so optimistic about the future on 9/10. The innocence of our youth disappeared that day. The world changed so much. I live close to Nick. About 30 minutes driving, but across the water. And I mostly remember the ashes falling from the sky in my neighborhood and the distinct smell. It wasn't just a fire smell. A smell that even my 7-year-old self will never forget. I lived on Long Island and the ashes and smell stick out the most to me. I was at work. I worked for Circuit City at the time. Just imagine seeing the Twin Towers on fire on 100 plus TVs all at once. I watched the second plane hit. Live. After that happened, it was painfully obvious this was no accident. I've seen videos of several cable channel broadcasts on a grid during the events. How each one slowly swapped over to the same feeds. I'm imagining that on a showroom wall. How customers must have slowly stopped shopping and then gathered around the wall. I was almost 4 and I came into the room and my mom was watching TV and kept trying to call my aunt who lived in Nick. But didn't say what happened. Just something bad. I actually had my birthday party still. Even though it was literally the same week. Was in 6th grade. And teacher turned on the news. Shows the exact moment it swapped to the people jumping from the towers. MRS. Kegel UFK'd some kids up that day. Seeing the people jumping is the part that always really gets to me. It's one thing to die in a tragedy. It's another to make that decision in sheer desperation and fear of a painful death. Oof. I still struggle watching or seeing any pictures of the jumpers. I was 25. I remember my mom shouting at me, "You have to come in and see this." I had just graduated from college with a degree in international politics. I ran out just in time to see the second tower hit. Oddly, I had written my senior thesis just a few months earlier on Islamic movements across the Muslim world. Even talked about Osama bin Laden. I was reading The Economist a lot in the late 90s. They mentioned him a fair bit, I remember. I don't remember much after that though. Mom got sick. Focus went elsewhere, etc. It was very weird. I remember coming home from school and getting a message from my brother saying a plane had flew into the World Trade Center. Then a little while later another message saying another plane flew into the other tower and it was a terrorist attack. It was on nearly every channel on TV. A constant replay of the towers crashing down and the planes flying into the building. I was living in England at the time and the atmosphere was somber and akin to when Princess Diana died. So I can't imagine what the atmosphere felt like over in America. A lot of people were surprised about who did it. Before that day, Osama bin Laden was pretty much unknown to the common person walking down the street. The world has changed a lot since then. The saddest thing about it is you have people fighting in the army now that are fighting in a war that started because of 9/11 but they wasn't even born then. I was 22 and usually never listened to the actual radio, but for some reason that day I turned it on for my drive to work. I didn't even move the car out of park before hearing enough that I had to go inside and turn on the TV. The first plane had just hit. I sat there glued to the television the whole day. The following days back at work, I work in big oil, were memorable because we kept getting bomb threats. It was pretty much daily that first week. After that we were evacuated and just sent home. I was in 8th grade. MRS. Ours English class. And saw the second plane hit live played on the TV in class. I remember feeling really scared. But what I remember the most is the people jumping from the buildings as they were burning and collapsing. I just thought at how horrible it must really be that those poor souls felt they had to make that choice. I was a senior in HS just a couple of miles outside of DC. A lot of guys had parents that worked in government. On that particular day, it was absolutely terrifying. For the most part we did a great job that day of closing ranks and helping those guys while they tried frantically to reach their parents. It wasn't as easy as it would be today. Because there wasn't a cell phone in every bag. The office let guys use the phones and we all, students and teachers, pulled our pocket change to let guys make as many calls as they needed to reach their families. Over the next couple of weeks the initial panic died down and the reality set in that there would probably be a war and we were all either already 18 or about to turn 18. Some guys made plans to enlist or to accept ROTC scholarships. Other guys panicked. Most of us just kept up with our plans and hoped for the best. Being 11 at the time, I thought it was a sweet looking movie come to life. I could not stop watching the replays of the crashes collapses. It just looked so cool. It didn't hit me until later on that people were actually dying and so many cherished lives were lost. I remember selfishly thinking, so do we get to go home? I was also 11 and as horrible as the next 11-year-old. But throughout the day it started to hit me that the plane and the building had a ridiculous amount of people on them. I had foreign exchange students living at my house. They were supposed to leave on the 12th of September. It took a couple days to get in touch with their families as communication was cut off going in out of the US. We ended up calling their consulate and they negotiated with the US government to have them leave about 2 weeks later. Surreal. I was working at a .com and we dragged TVs into the break room to watch what was happening. When the first plane hit, everyone thought it was a horrible accident. When the second plane hit and then reports came in about the Pentagon, we knew something massive was up. Nobody believed the towers would actually come down. I distinctly remember seeing some footage of the corner crumbling and saying aloud, "It's coming down." Everyone still shrieked when it happened. We got sent home for the rest of the day. Everyone was in a state of shock. I was 24 in California and realized a lot of people really hate the USA. Learned a lot about how certain groups have their own ideas, agendas, propaganda to persuade people to thinking certain way, and how the world's big hitters just play a game of Jenga with all of us until somebody goes off the deep end and knocks over all the pieces. I was young, so I remember it through kid glasses. My teacher got a phone call and left crying. It was first or second grade, and we were all really confused about why we were left alone. A sub came in not long after. Grown-ups were in a panic state for weeks. My parents didn't explain anything to me. I'm school, they told us buildings blew up and a lot of people died. I remember thinking it was a shame but not understanding what it had to do with the rest of us. I was in elementary school and class walk just stopped. Kids were getting picked up throughout the day but our teachers wouldn't tell us anything. When I got home, we watched the Twin Towers collapsing on the news on repeat just over and over and over for hours on end. We knew it was a terrorist attack and America was being attacked, but no one seemed to know why. I never really grasped the gravity of the attack until much later. Probably not until I watched the Norday Brothers documentary. I got drunk the night of the 10th of September 2001, so I slept through it. Found out about it when I got up around 10 AM. Didn't seem real. Went to work for 11 AM at a pizza place. We had a TV in the kitchen. Watched TV all day and made almost no pizzas because there were very few customers. Went home after work and continued to watch TV until I went to bed. Weird day I'll never forget. I was getting ready for school that morning. I was 15 and I live in Canada, and I remember my mother calling us to the living room. One tower had been hit, and while eating breakfast in shock and awe, watched the second plane hit live. It was surreal to say the least to watch the towers fall down shortly after. We ended up getting to school late, where we basically spent the rest of the day in the gym watching it unfold on TV. I was a senior in high school. I was in my first period sociology class, and the school secretary appeared in the doorway and told us what happened. She heard the news and went door to door to tell everyone. We moved from class to class whenever the bell rang, but in every one we just sat and watched the news. I remember looking around at all my 17 and 18-year-old classmates, especially the boys, and wondering if we were going to have another war and if we were going to get drafted. A lot of us had relatives who were in Vietnam, and I think that crossed a lot of our minds. No one knew what was going to happen. We just knew something huge had changed. Went to work. Heard about the first plane. Figured it was a little Cessna single engine, and went on about what I was doing. Later in the day heard the news of the second plane, and knew it had to be terrorism. Went back to my college campus, and as I watched the collapses live, I reflected on the fact I had enlisted, delayed entry, 3 months prior. The rest of my years in college was fully knowing I would be heading to Afghanistan. Then Iraq war kicked off during basic training. So I am actually a 9/11 baby. I was celebrating my 4th birthday on the 11th of September 2001. I obviously don't remember much in detail from that day BC of how young I was. However, I do remember my parents and relatives trying to keep me distracted and not wanting me to watch the TV BC a scary show was on. I do remember seeing the live footage, but again, didn't realize it was an event happening in real life at that moment. Now as an adult, it's always amusing to tell people my birthday and see the wide range of reactions. I was a senior. Had an abscess in my tooth and stayed home after getting it removed that morning. I was lazing about and my mom walked in and changed the channel. We just watched it all happening on the news. I was still in disbelief the next day at school, when my buddy accuses me of masterminding it all in front of all of homeroom to explain my absence the day before. Yeah. We never took anything seriously. I was in the 4th grade in NIC when it happened. I knew something was off because the teacher didn't start the class. Then kids started leaving cause their parents came and picked them up. Before mine came, the teacher on the chalkboard illustrated what happened. Because we were so young, it didn't really hit us until our parents came and took us home. I remember seeing it on all the TV channels, even into the 3 PM cartoons time slot. I remember 2 or 3 days later when school started back up, there was a very dusty smoke that morning. I was at a McDonald's and there was a dust like smog. Like from a busy construction site, but with a bit of a burning smell to it. I worked in the Pentagon that day. Suddenly there was a loud explosion and items and shelves were dislodged. Furniture moved slightly. At that early hour people were still arriving for work. And over the PA system we were ordered to evacuate the building. Upon leaving the building, I could see the plane sticking out one side of the Pentagon with smoke billowing from the impact. I found that all public transportation was stopped from providing service. I had to walk a couple of miles to a nearby neighborhood to catch a bus that got me closer to home but still required a good hike to get there. All retail establishments closed up shop in our area, grocery stores, restaurants, gas stations etc. All the teachers were crying but wouldn't tell us what happened. Their logic was that it was the job of the parents to explain. I finally got a teacher to say 2 planes crashed into buildings in Nick by accident. Even my young brain called bullshit. We were supposed to take a Nick field trip in 2 weeks. We went to Six Flags instead. It was fun. I grew up on Long Island. I was in 2nd grade when the planes hit. All of the teachers were an absolute mess. Kids were getting picked up left and right. Just absolute pandemonium. I lived close enough to the city that I could smell and see the smoke. I came home to my parents and grandparents all crying hysterically on the couch. Everyone I know lost someone that day. I remember it like it was yesterday. It brings a new meaning to never forget. I was living in Nick on the Upper East Side. About to do my morning reverse commute out to Westchester when my boss called and told me to turn on the TV. The first plane had just hit. I was simultaneously watching it on TV while also watching the smoke rise up 2nd Avenue after the second plane hit. The next 2 days in New York were the most emotional and eerie days of my life. But the vibe in New York has never been more compassionate and unified.